Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari and today we are going to go over my 1990s wrap-up from October. Now, before we get into the books, you might notice the star rainbow on my forehead. I have a giant pimple on my forehead and I figured no one wants to look at that, so I put a zit sticker on it, which is like a little sticker thing that kind of helps reduce the swelling and the grossness of a pimple. These are from Starface. I'll link the company down in the bottom if you get the occasional zit and you want to cover it up and you want to buy them. They're really nice. They work fantastic and there's no chemicals in them. This is not sponsored. I just like the damn stickers and I have a really obvious one on my face right now. Anyway, because it was October for the 1990s, I read all horror. Now, before I actually start about the books, I want to make two kind of like general statements. The first statement being, none of these scared me. Like, at all. A lot of these books, a lot of people say scare them, so I think it's just me who is not getting the scary spookiness from novels. I get scared out of my mind from video games, I get scared out of my mind from movies. I'm just not getting it from the novels. So there you go. That's a thing. Take it how you will. The other thing is, I don't want to say this about individual books, but it's something that I saw was a big trend during the 90s. So I'm going to like put it as kind of a general thing, so I'm not spoiling books, and that is the 90s really liked open-ended endings. Basically, a lot of these books didn't have an explanation or any sort of ending that gave you closure. It was just like, and that's it. Good luck figuring out what the fuck happened. So I read a whole lot of those. If those bother you, then maybe some of these books aren't going to be for you. I do have which ones are open-ended and which ones are not in my Goodreads reviews, so if that's something that you don't feel like it's going to spoil you but you know it will annoy you about the book, then check out my Goodreads page and see my reviews for those individual books. Now, let's get into it. So, for 1991, I read American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This is about a wealthy white Wall Street guy in the 1990s. He's wealthy from inheritance, plus he has a fairly lucrative job on Wall Street that makes him more money. He's also completely fucking psychotic and he murders people. And this book is basically from his perspective as he goes around being psychotic, and just, it's terrifying in the way that you can imagine a wealthy white man getting away with the shit that this guy gets away with in modern times. And people just don't even suspect him or don't really follow up on investigating him because he's wealthy and white. And there's even like situations in this story where he's like, yeah, I'm gonna be late to work today, I've got to go meet with my lawyer to discuss this rape charges, where he knows he legitimately raped women and nothing's going to happen to him because he's wealthy and white. And that's terrifying in and of itself. This is written, like, this guy has what I assume is supposed to be OCD, where it's very descriptive. Every time he walks into a room, he will describe what every single person is wearing and the brand that it is. So he'll be like, that's a Giorgio Armani suit, and the tie is from this company or this designer, and the shoes are from this designer, and the socks are from this designer. He does that with food as well, where he very detailed gives you descriptions of everything he's eating. And I want to say he does it with something else, but I just can't remember. Oh, electronics. So he's always talking about like the latest electronic trends, and it takes place in like the late 80s. So like the latest electronic trends are like a VCR and a Walkman. So not really modern in that aspect, but everything else you could totally just see it happening. So if you don't like extensively long list of descriptions, don't like feel uncomfortable about like sexual assault, murder, sexualized murder, harming of animals, stay the fuck away from this. But if you want to be kind of terrified by something that you can imagine being real, then read this. This is a lot creepier than the movie. Like a lot creepier than the movie. I don't think they could get away with what's actually in this book in a movie form. But there you go. I gave it 3 stars. It creeped me out, but the extensive list and stuff like that I glossed over. Next up for 1992 is The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. This is about a little boy who follows a stranger to a house because just to have fun and to play. The stranger tricks him to saying like, your parents know you're here, I called them, you can talk to them on the phone, it's no big deal. But this house it's like a creepy house, and you get the seasons, the holidays every single day. You don't have to do anything except for play and whatever, and you're basically a child for the rest of your life. And it's written like a children's creepy story because it is about very, very young children. So not my favorite because it was a bit too young for my personal taste, but I understand why a lot of people like this. It's very well written. It's a very interesting magical system, whatever, overall. It just reads too young for my personal taste, so it's a 3-star from me. Next up for 1993, I read Nightmares and Dreamscapes by Stephen King, and this is a chunky, this is I think almost 1,000 pages, just under 900 pages of short stories by Stephen King. And how I read this is I read like 1 short story a day over the month. There's about like 24 short stories in here or something like that, and it was okay. There was no short stories in here that stood out as like amazingly good, but there also weren't any short stories in here that I thought were like awful and I hated. So it was very mediocre. I think if you don't like Stephen King, you probably won't like this. If you're a huge Stephen King fan and you just want to get through a backlog of Stephen King stuff, then sure, you'll probably like this. I thought Everything's Eventual is a much better short story collection than this one, personally, if you're just looking for a recommendation on Stephen King short stories. Next up for 1994 is Covenant with a Vampire by, how the hell? I can't say her name. Focus. Jeannie? I don't know, and I'm not even going to try that. I don't know. We're giving up. This is the tale of Dracula, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, but 50 years before the actual, like, Dracula book. And this is the descendants of Vlad the Impaler are in a covenant with Dracula, or Vlad the Impaler, to basically care for him, so take care of the estate and provide him with people to murder. And the eldest son of each generation, eldest living son of each generation, takes over as Dracula's caretaker, provides him with meals and money, And in exchange for that, then his children will not be harmed unless he breaks one of the rules of the covenant. So if you try to save somebody from being killed by Dracula, then your sacrifice is your wife or one of your children, something like that. And this just kind of is the turning over of the family from one generation's death to the next, and the next generation like learning what his responsibilities to Dracula are. This is written this is written in the same style as Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is not my favorite writing style. I don't particularly care for it, but if you are a huge fan of Dracula and a huge fan of that writing style, you might like this series. This is the first book in a series. I don't have any interest in reading anything other than this book, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great, so again, 3 stars. Next up for 1995 was another vampire book, and this was Vivia by Tanith Lee. Now, this is a completely different kind of vampire book. This is written more in the style of a romance novel. There is a lot of sex. Wasn't expecting that. A lot of sex, a lot of nudity, a lot of weird, twisted BDSM freaky shit goes on in this book, but I actually really, really liked it. It was weird enough that I thought it was good, and this was like endlessly depressing. Like, nothing good happens to Vivia as a character in this book. Like, that woman is fucked. She does not have a good life, and for some reason I like books like that. Like, we'll never know why that is my thing, that I like really depressing dark books with depressing dark endings. So this is like a medieval type vampire thing, and I don't know if you know this or not, but women were treated as property during the medieval times. This is fantasy, so this doesn't take place in like a real world, but it's medieval based, and she was treated like property. Like, it doesn't matter that she is a powerful vampire, she's still a woman and still treated like property. And shit was dark. This is dark. Like, the same thing with the American Psycho, except for not in a modern setting. If sexual assault bothers you, if murder bothers you, if torture of animals bother you, do not read this book. Also, if like graphic sex scenes bother you, yeah. But I liked it, because I'm weird. Next up for 1996, the book that I was supposed to read is Tock by Dean Koontz. This is horror comedy, and I hated it. Like, I don't even remember how far I got in here, maybe 100 pages, and I hated it so much. I had to DNF it. Like, you don't understand like how much I hated this book. It wasn't funny, it was racist, it wasn't scary, it was supposed to be funny, but it's just racist against Asian people. Apparently, Dean Koontz in the 90s thought that racism against Asian people is funny. So, DNF'd this, don't recommend it. Instead, I picked up a horror book that isn't actually horror. I read Into the Wild by John Krakauer. Why can't I say his name? John Crocker. John Krakauer. I don't know why I can't say his name. But anyway, this is nonfiction about a young man who just straight up gave away his inheritance and became a homeless bum. and just kind of walked across, walked, bummed his way across, hitchhiked America for a little while, and decided to go hitchhike to Alaska and spend like a few months in the Alaska wilderness just living off the land, which it's not easy to do. This kid was smart, book smart. Basically, he's one of those kids who had a lot of privilege and was always told that they were really smart growing up. But he didn't seem to have a whole lot of common sense on top of his book smart. So he was woefully unprepared and ended up dying. And honestly, the thing that ended up killing him was not something that even if he was book smart that he would have known, because it wasn't something studied until well after this book was published. So him being stupid or the thing that killed him wasn't like why he was stupid, it's the fact that he went into the wilderness woefully unprepared. And maybe he would have survived if the thing that killed him would have been studied more. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would have survived this trip and died on another. But it's basically like his story told from nonfiction from this dude investigating it afterwards. Now, I think this book, it's short, but I think that there was content in this book that was not necessary. There was like chapters about like other white dudes who had disappeared into the wilderness and either disappeared or died, never seen from again. There was a couple chapters about the author's life and his experiences doing stupid white boy shit in the wilderness, which also was completely unnecessary to this story in my opinion. But the base story of this, skipping those chapters, was actually very interesting and a little bit scary because he wandered into the wilderness and died. It really happened. But I gave this 3 stars just because of like the unnecessary shit in it. But if you're interested in like wilderness stuff and you think that you're just smart enough to survive whatever, you should probably read this and, do your research before you wander into the Alaskan wilderness by yourself. Next up for 1997, I read From Hell, which is a graphic novel by Alan Moore and illustrated by Eddie Campbell. So, graphic novel, it's still long. It still took me a long time to read this, even if it is a graphic novel. This is the graphic novel story of Jack the Ripper. So, and this is fictionalized. Like, the events in this novel are not actually what happened with Jack the Ripper. Like, this is completely fictional stuff based off of a real situation. So, while the women who died in this are real people and somebody murdered them, like, this is not actually trying to explain what really happened to those women. This is about, like, the Queen Victoria told her physician to get rid of these women because they were threatening, or they were blackmailing the crown, the throne, whatever. And he was kind of psychotic and was part of, or he was a Mason, is that what that's called? Not the Illuminati, but the other ones. And he thought that he could see the future and summon the old gods through ritualized murders. So obviously that's not what really happened, but it's a very interesting story. It is very graphic. A lot of people complain about not liking the art style. I thought the art style was very good. There's a lot of nudity in this, both female and male full frontal nudity, so this is not for your children. It's also really creepy, and there's a lot of murders, so definitely not for your children. But if you are interested in like fictionalized Jack the Ripper stuff or just creepy graphic novels, you might really like this. I really like Alan Moore's graphic novels, or at least the two that I've read so far. I really enjoyed. I did read another Jack the Ripper story this month that is not part of this TBR. It'll be in my next wrap up, and that one is The Five, which is non-fiction about the lives of the women that Jack the Ripper murdered. And if you're really interested in Jack the Ripper, I think you should watch that one too, because the interesting part is that 3 of the 5 women murdered by Jack the Ripper were not prostitutes at all. People just hate women. Surprise, surprise. Next up for 1998, I read Homebody by Orson Scott Card. Now, Orson Scott Card is the author of Ender's Game, and this is obviously completely different. This is horror and modern contemporary horror. I liked this book, but I don't know that everybody would like this book for the same reason that I do. This is about a guy who basically flips houses. He will buy a house that is crumbling down. He will fix it, not necessarily like restore it, but he'll like make it livable again, and then sell it, and then use the money that he gains in that sell and buys another house, and on and on and on. And I like home reno stuff, so that was really interesting. But other parts of this house were, or other parts of this story were really weird. There was a romance, a budding romance, I guess, at the beginning of this book that was, I had nothing to do with the rest of the book. I didn't understand it at all. I am so confused why that was included ever at all. And it was like uncomfortable to read about, like super uncomfortable to read about. And then the ending I thought was kind of stupid, but what are you gonna do? But a haunted house story about a fixer-upper house. You might like it, you might not. It wasn't the best horror book that I've ever read, but it definitely did something that I haven't read before. So there you go. Interesting, but meh. Next up, I read Scary Rednecks and Other Inbred Horrors by Weston Ochi and David Whitman. Now this is a collection of short horror stories that kind of alternated between the two authors. Like Weston would write one, and then David would write the next one, and then Weston and David and whatever. I thought this was gonna be like funny, but I forgot that in the 90s, if you're talking about rednecks, then you're talking about homophobic assholes and not funny. So these were the most homophobic, racist trash that I have read in a long time. I gave this 1 star. I gave it 0 stars if I possibly could, but I highly do not recommend this shit to anybody. To be fair to the authors, or to one of the authors, is David Whitman was the one writing these severely homophobic things. Weston Ochi had tiny little sprinkles of homophobia and like racism, but nothing like just downright disgusting like David Whitman had. And for highlights of what kind, like what I'm talking about with homophobia, we have one story where the entire plot of the story is a guy gets a rattlesnake that crawls up his pants and bites him in the dick, and his buddies have to suck his dick to save his life. That's not funny. That's homophobic. And they're worried, like the entire time they're worried about like him being gay. You have another one where it's the same group of guys in all of these stories. They get kidnapped by aliens, and he gets a probe, an anal probe, and the anal probe hits his prostate and he moans. And so for the rest of his life, all of his buddies just make fun of him for being gay because he liked it. That is so fucking disgusting and uncalled for that they're gonna try to make a joke about getting kidnapped and raped, even if it is by aliens. Like, fuck you. Then you had, oh, my favorite one, and by favorite I mean this was really gross. This same guy who's had his dick bit in the anal probe in the previous 2 short stories gets cursed by a voodoo queen to grow a vagina instead of his penis, and his buddies have to sexually assault him and impregnate him while he's drunk and sleeping in order to restore his penis. And the only way that his buddy can get it up is to dress him in drag, which is transphobic and fucking disgusting. And there's way more stories like that. Like, this is so gross and problematic that everybody should fuck off away from this author. Like, I will never read anything by that author again just because of these stories, because it's gross. Now, there were a couple of other stories in the short story collection that weren't bad. A couple of them that I probably would have liked if I wasn't so disgusted and pissed off by how homophobic and transphobic and racist that this shit was. It was fucking awful. And the last book that I read for 2020 was House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. This is a, I guess, multimedia type book where it's kind of like found footage in a book, I guess is the way that it's going to be described. If you can't read multiple books at once, this book is not for you, because this tells the story of a guy who found like an educational publication, or like a, how do I say this? Like an essay on a movie that doesn't exist. And you kind of go through the essay of the movie and like a educational, peer-reviewed, even though it's not peer-reviewed, type of like essay on this movie. And the movie is about a guy whose house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and it's really creepy, shit like that. And you have that part of the story, but then you also have the guy who is putting together these notes into the book House of Leaves, who is not Mark Danielewski, it's another guy completely, and kind of his mental breakdown and nightmares and all of that shit that goes wrong with him while he's trying to like review this movie, or to put together the like notes on this essay. And that's why it's such in a weird like formatting, because a lot of it is just random notes on napkins, in margins of things. There's a bajillion different fonts. There's like interviews from horror writers and movie people and scientists and stuff like that. And he even talks about in here where he's like, he's tried to contact some of these people and they're like, I've never heard of this movie. I've never seen it. That's not a quote from me. So it's really weird like that. But you are reading like multiple different timelines and multiple different stories at the same time in this book. There's also like footnotes and things written in the margin that they're just like list. You can skip around in this story without like actually reading it. You're actually encouraged to like skip around and skip things that are like list of food, like there's grocery list and stuff like in here. So not everything is something that you're definitely going to read, but it's weird. Like, if you don't like weird shit, you're probably not going to like this. I thought it was okay. I basically wasn't scared. So, and I didn't go crazy reading it. So I was kind of like, oh yeah, I get it. That's kind of a cool concept, but I'm not scared. So whatever, 3 stars. And that is everything I read this month. Let me know what you think about the books I read. If you have any feedback or you disagree or agree with me about any of this stuff, just let me know in the comments and I will catch you in the next video.